So, hello students, and from today onwards, I'll be taking some lectures on child psychology as well. So, the topic what I'll be discussing today, it is the ego defense mechanisms, and in the videos, I'll be discussing about the Sigmund Freud's the psychic model or the psychic triad. So, in the psychic triad, discussing the psychic triad, there are basically three things what are there in the psychic triad is the id, next is the ego, and after that it is the superego. So students, today's video I'll be mainly focusing upon the second part of the psychic triad, that is the ego, and the topic today what I'll be taking up, it is the ego defense. So in child psychology, it is mostly asked that mention about the different types of the child psychology. So students, beginning with as to what is the ego defense mechanism. So the brief introduction what I'll be giving about the ego defense mechanism is that ego, it depends on the reality principle, the superego, and the id as best as it can. So when anxiety becomes overwhelming, the ego must defend itself. It tries to do so by distorting or the modifying the things to such an extent that it becomes more acceptable. So the ego must defend itself, and these techniques by which the anxiousness is prevented by distorting them into a more favorable condition, into a less threatening form, these are known as defense mechanism. And when anxiety is going to become overwhelming, the ego must defend itself. So there are various techniques by which the ego defense mechanism can be looked upon. So firstly, these techniques are known as the ego defense mechanism, and the first method by which the ego is defended, it is by displacement. So when looking at displacement, so the definition for displacement is that this is the transfer of desires or impulses onto a substitute or an object which is less threatening. So students, as you all might be knowing, the best example what can be looked upon when we are going to have a look of as to what is displacement, in most of the cases you must have seen when a child is scolded by the teacher. So the child is unable to revert back his feelings. So what he is going to do, he is going to express his anger or anxiousness by just shouting at juniors, slamming a door, or stamping a foot. So this is the method by which he is trying to overcome his anxiousness by displacing his feelings onto a less dangerous substitute, as he cannot shout on the teacher. So this was the first method, that is the displacement. Next, moving on to the next method, that it is by projection. So projection, the literal definition for this word projection, it is that this is where the characteristics or the desires which are unacceptable to one's ego are externalized or projected onto others. So the example what can be looked upon here is that if a person is going to have aggressive feelings towards others, and such feelings she is unable to accept it, that she is having these aggressive feelings towards others. So this is absolutely unacceptable to his or her ego. So now, in order to ward off this kind of a feeling, he may now think that others may have aggressive feeling towards him or her. So this is another mechanism by which the ego tries to defend itself. So the second method was projection, where a person is having certain kinds of feelings towards himself, he is having, but okay, it is certain kind of feelings he's having within himself, but since it is unacceptable for he or her ego to accept that feeling, he's trying to project that others have aggressive feelings towards him or her. Moving on to the next method of ego defense, it is the reaction formation. So this is a very, when looking at the definition for it, this is where a person displays a behavior that is exactly opposite of an impulse that she dare not express or acknowledge. So students, this reaction formation in most of the day-to-day life, we have seen that there are certain instances in life where we are unable to express our temper or anger. So this reaction formation can be seen that at certain places when we are having extreme temper or extreme anger is there, but since we cannot show our temper or anger, we start laughing at that adverse situation. So here, what is there is the anger feelings, what should be shown at that very moment, but since that impulse cannot be portrayed in front of the society, so in order to ward off, the person starts laughing. So this is another method where the ego is trying to defend itself. In other words, if a child is having certain kind of a bad experiences about a dental treatment, he may start thinking about the positive aspects of the dental treatment in order to have positive feelings, in order to ward off anxiety. Next, moving on to the next thing, the next method of ego defense, it is the regression. So regression, the word is itself is suggesting that something is going to regress or to come back. So in this, it is found that an individual attempts to avoid the current anxiety, that an individual is trying to attempt or avoid the current anxiety by withdrawing to behavior patterns of an earlier age, and this is an age inappropriate response. So the best example of the regression can be looked upon as that in certain children, it is found that they are in the habit of nail biting during their younger age or in their infancy, or when they were young, in the ages of preschool age or certain ages, some children are in the habit of nail biting. But this nail biting can again be reverted back. After a certain time period, this nail biting habit has gone. But this regression of the nail biting habit can again be seen when a child faces some kind of a dangerous situation or a situation which is threatening to him. For example, the child who was in the habit of nail biting can regress back to the same habit when he is in an anxious state. For example, when he or she is not prepared for the exams. So this is another method of the ego defense. Moving on to repression. So this repression can have two forms. Firstly, which is known as the primal repression, and next it is the primary repression. So in case of the primary repression, the expulsion of thoughts and memories that might provoke anxiety from the conscious mind. So such thoughts and such memories, what are going to provoke anxiety, are expelled from the conscious mind. So this is known as the primary repression, and the process by which the hidden impulses, the hidden id impulses particularly, are blocked from ever reaching the consciousness. This is known as the primal repression. So the fact what needs to be emphasized over here, it is that within the Freudian theory, as we have seen, that within the Freudian theory, Freud has suggested that the repressed memories are not deactivated. The repressed memories, they are not deactivated. They continue to affect a person's behavior later in adulthood, mostly in disguised or in symbolic forms, such as it can come in the form of dreams or neurotic behavior. So this repression, it is the expulsion. I have said that repression can be of two types. One is the primary repression, the other is the primal repression. In primary repression, what do we find is that it is the expulsion of thoughts or memories that might provoke anxiousness from the conscious mind. So for example, if a child patient is having a past painful dental treatment experiences, so he may, in order to ward off anxiety, he may stop thinking about that painful experience. So students, this was another method of the ego defense. Moving on to the next method of ego defense, that is the rationalization. So when looking at the definition for rationalization, the dictionary meaning for the word rationalization, it is having or obtaining logic, or to show logic or reasoning behind a particular situation or a concept. So rationalization, this is an attempt to explain our behavior to ourselves and others in such a way that are seen as rational or socially acceptable instead of irrational or unacceptable. So students, and this is a very common day-to-day experience, that sometimes whenever we don't want ourselves to be put into such a situation which is a situation what is merely because of our fault. Our ego is not satisfied in that condition, so we try to impose that particular thing onto a different substance or a substitute. For example, if a child is getting less marks in an exam, so he may try to rationalize his getting lesser marks in the exam by straight away blaming the teacher, that the teacher has done strict marking. So this is another way of ego defense, where the child, instead of he is having a poor performance, but that is unacceptable to himself, he is unable to accept that fact, and that too he doesn't want that it should be presented in the society in such a manner. So in the society, when he's going to talk or present towards himself, he will straight away say that he has done as well, but the less marks what he has got, it is due to the strict marking format what has been employed in the exams. So next method, was another method of ego defense. Moving on to the next method of ego defense, that is the denial. So in most of the day-to-day situations, we find the statement of denial. It says that where a person may deny certain aspect of reality. So in most of the conditions, whereas there are certain patients, if a large ulcer in a patient's mouth is diagnosed as a carcinoma, is diagnosed as carcinoma by one of the doctor, the patient is feeling anxious. In order to ward off this anxiousness, what he will try to do is, he is going to consult another doctor for the denial of the diagnosis. And the last method of ego defense, it is the identification, where a person is going to behave in a way of another person in order to ward off his ego. So these are the few ways of ego defense mechanism. As I've already said, the ego deals with the reality principle, the id and the super ego as best as it can. In reality, when anxiety becomes overwhelming, the ego must defend itself. It does so by consciously blocking or distorting the situations into a less serious or a less threatening forms. And these are the ego defense mechanisms by which the ego tries to defend itself. So students, this was my first lecture on the child psychology, that is particularly the ego defense mechanisms. In the coming videos, I'll be talking of the Sigmund Freudian theory, the Piaget's theory of cognitive development, and so on. So students, those who are visiting my channel for the first time and they haven't subscribed yet, please go do and subscribe my channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon so that you can be further updated for my upcoming videos. Thank you for watching.